A widowed man travels a long way to retrieve his newborn baby, but when he tries to return home with that child, he is refused entry into the plane. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video with your friends. Bob Hollis was running late. The 40-year-old had just received a call from a Florida hospital telling him a girl had just been born and he was listed as the father. He would have discounted it as a prank, but he knew his wife was in Florida for a short holiday he organized for her while he renovated their home. It was a surprise. The two had no kids of their own and had adopted 3 because adoption was something they both wanted to be involved in, so they needed to add more rooms to their house, which was why he was renovating. Among the two, Bob was more particular about getting a foster child because he was one himself, and he had grown up promising himself to take in as many kids as he could. If I can help those kids grow up to be the best of themselves, then I feel like I've made a huge difference, he told his wife while they were discussing it. Bob was also father to 2 grown kids, whom he conceived while he was with his former wife, Ellen. The two went their separate ways after the woman decided to cheat with their pool boy, and she was caught. He met his second wife, Mary, 2 years later, and after dating for several months, they got married. They tried to have kids but were unsuccessful, and this motivated them to look into adoption. But they never stopped trying to make babies. One day, their persistence paid off, and Mary conceived a child. It was in preparation of the baby's arrival that Bob decided to expand the house to include a nursery and an extra room. After making the decision, he got Mary, who was due in 2 months, on a plane to Florida, a place she had always wanted to visit. But when she arrived in Florida, the woman immediately went into labor and was subsequently rushed to the hospital. Unfortunately, she died during childbirth, so Bob was told that because the child was a newborn, it was necessary to fly out immediately. He packed his suitcases and flew to Florida to pick up her daughter. When his plane landed, he rented a car and made his way to the hospital, where his wife had allegedly passed away. The news of her death still ate at him, but he knew there would be time to grieve later, so he focused on bringing home their only child together. When he arrived at the hospital, he met with the volunteer at the intensive care unit, a woman who was 82 years old and recently widowed. Her name was Mrs. Sticks, and she had things to tell Bob. "What happened?" he asked her as soon as he entered her office. "Have a seat, Mr. Hollis," she said calmly. "I'm better off standing," he replied. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hollis, but your wife suffered some complications giving birth to your child." At that, Bob cried bitterly, and Mrs. Sticks quietly watched him, choosing to let him grieve. After a few minutes, she cleared her throat and spoke. "As I understand, you have come for the child, but I have to make sure that you have what it takes to care for one," Mrs. Sticks said. Bob let her know that he was already a father, and Mrs. Meredith Sticks nodded appreciatively as if to say, "You'll do," but she still gave him her phone number. "Call me if you need anything," she said. The kind woman also offered her new acquaintance a ride to the airport on the day of departure. Things went on smoothly for Bob until it was time to board the plane. When he got to the boarding gate, the woman at the counter refused to let him through. "Is this your child, sir?" she asked. "Of course she is," he said. "I'm sorry, but she seems too young to be on an airplane. How old is she?" "She's 4 days old." "Now, can I get through?" Bob said. "I'm sorry, sir, but you'll have to present her birth certificate and wait till she is at least 7 days old before traveling with her," the woman said sternly. "What's this?" Bob asked angrily. "Are you saying I have to remain here for the next couple of days?" "I have no family here to stay with, which is why I must get home today." "I'm sorry, it's the policy," the woman said, and turned her attention to the next person in line. Bob knew that it would take him quite some time to obtain the document, but he also had nowhere to go in Florida and no one to ask for help. He was preparing to spend the night at the airport when he remembered Mrs. Sticks, the kind woman from the medical center. He would rather not have bothered her, but he had no choice, and the night was quickly approaching. "Hello, Meredith," he said. "I need your help." When Mrs. Sticks found out about Bob's problem, she immediately promised to return to the airport and bring them to her home. It was an offer that astounded Bob, who knew he would most likely have refused to help if he was in her place. Compassion still thrives in this world, he thought to himself. Bob stayed at Mrs. Sticks's house for more than a week before he returned to Texas. The woman didn't just welcome Bob and his daughter into her home. She helped him cope with the newborn baby as well as the death of his wife by talking to him and comforting him. She even helped him arrange for the proper transportation of his wife's body, making things easier for him. The man could not believe how generous she was and would always call her a real angel. Even his daughter seemed to love the woman because the girl would start to glow and giggle just from hearing the woman's voice. During his stay, Bob learned that the woman had 4 grown children, 7 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Together, they looked after the baby, took relieving walks, and even went to honor the memory of Mrs. Styx's departed husband, activities that brought the two even closer. The man saw in Mrs. Styx his mother, who'd passed away a long time ago, and he knew he would miss her a lot when he flew home. After receiving his daughter's birth certificate, he was permitted to return home, but Bob continued to keep in touch with the old lady who had helped him. He had no idea how things would have worked out without her, and he never forgot her kindness. So he visited her every year with his little daughter until she passed away a few years later. A lawyer reached out to him at her funeral and told him that Mrs. Styx had left him part of her inheritance, just like she did for her kids. In honor of her kindness, Bob donated the money to a charity he founded together with her 4 kids, including her oldest daughter, Shirley, whom he fell in love with due to constant exposure to her charms. Later, the two got married, and she became a mother to his 6 kids,